The sound of splashing water and a desperate gasp for air shattered the peaceful morning at Rockaway Beach as Keith Mitchell dropped the sandwich he was unwrapping and sprinted across the sand. His heart hammered against his ribs as he watched a woman's arms flailing in the water about 50 yards offshore, clearly caught in a rip current that was rapidly pulling her away from the beach. "Dad, what are you doing?" His 10-year-old daughter, Lily, called out from their worn beach blanket, but Keith was already knee-deep in the water, then waist-deep, then swimming with powerful strokes toward the struggling figure. Keith had been a competitive swimmer in high school before life threw its curveballs at him. Now, at 34, he was a single father working 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads after his wife had passed away 3 years ago. Swimming wasn't something he did much anymore, but the muscle memory remained as he cut through the water with desperate determination. The woman's head disappeared beneath the surface just as he reached her. Without hesitation, Keith dove under, the salt stinging his eyes as he searched the murky water. His lungs burned as he spotted her limp form drifting downward. With a powerful kick, he reached her, grabbed her around the waist, and pulled her to the surface. "Help!" he shouted as he treaded water, turning the woman onto her back. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, no response, no breathing. Fighting the current, Keith managed to pull them both toward shore until his feet touched sand. He lifted the woman in his arms, her expensive silk blouse and designer shorts soaked through, and carried her to the beach where a small crowd had gathered. Among them was Lily, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "Someone call 911, Keith shouted as he laid the woman down on dry sand. She wasn't breathing. Without hesitation, he tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. Then he positioned his hands on her sternum and began chest compressions, counting under his breath. "Is she dead?" Lily whispered, clutching her stuffed dolphin that had been a gift from her mother. "No, honey, stand back and give her space," Keith instructed without breaking rhythm. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. It felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute when the woman suddenly convulsed, coughing up seawater. Keith quickly rolled her onto her side as she gasped and sputtered. "You're okay," he said soothingly. "Just breathe. Help is coming." The woman's eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue against her pale face, and locked onto Keith's. For a moment, despite the chaos and the crowd, it felt like they were the only 2 people on the beach. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely before another coughing fit overtook her. The paramedics arrived minutes later, taking over care and loading her onto a stretcher. Keith gave them a quick summary of what had happened while trying to calm Lily, who was clutching his dripping, wet t-shirt. "Sir, we'd like you to come to the hospital too, just to get checked out," one paramedic suggested. Keith shook his head. "I'm fine. I have my daughter here and we rode our bikes. We'll be okay." "At least let me get your name," the woman said weakly from the stretcher, her voice barely audible. Keith Mitchell. Fiona Gardiner," she replied before the paramedics whisked her away. Keith stood on the beach, watching the ambulance pull away, unaware that he had just saved one of the wealthiest women in the country and that his life was about to change forever. "Dad, you're a hero," Lily said, her voice filled with wonder as she slipped her small hand into his. Keith smiled down at her, sand clinging to his wet jeans. "No, sweetie, just doing what anyone would do." He looked at their half-eaten lunch now covered in sand. "Let's pack up." "Looks like our beach day is over." On the bike ride home to their small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, Keith couldn't stop thinking about the woman Fiona. There had been something in her eyes when she looked at him, a connection he hadn't felt with anyone since losing his wife to cancer. But he quickly dismissed the thought. Women like that didn't exist in his world of late rent notices and double shifts. 3 days later, Keith was running late for his morning job at the hardware store. Lily was dragging her feet getting ready for school, and the ancient coffee maker had decided to quit working. "Lily, we need to go, honey," he called, rummaging through a drawer for a permission slip he needed to sign. "But Dad, someone's at the door," Lily said, pointing toward the apartment entrance where a soft knock could be heard. Frowning, Keith checked his watch. He wasn't expecting anyone, and bill collectors usually didn't come this early. He opened the door to find a tall, elegantly dressed woman standing there, It took him a moment to recognize her outside the context of the beach and without seawater dripping from her hair. "Fiona," he said incredulously. She smiled, and Keith was struck by how much more beautiful she was when not on the verge of drowning. Her blonde hair was styled in a sophisticated bob, and she wore a simple but obviously expensive blue dress that matched her eyes. "Keith Mitchell," she said. "I hope you don't mind that I found you. I wanted to thank you properly for saving my life." "How did you find you? I have resources," she said with a slight smile. "May I come in?" Keith suddenly became acutely aware of their small, cluttered apartment with the second-hand furniture and the leak in the kitchen ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. "It's not much," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. Fiona walked in, her eyes taking in the modest surroundings but without a hint of judgment. "It's a home," she said simply. "That's what matters." Lily appeared from her bedroom, backpack slung over one shoulder, and stopped short when she saw the visitor. "You're the lady from the beach," she said, staring openly. "The one Dad saved." Fiona knelt down to Lily's level, something that seemed remarkable to Keith given her expensive clothing. "I am. My name is Fiona, and you must be Lily. Your dad told the paramedics about you." Lily nodded. "He's always saving people. He saved a dog last year too. It got stuck in a storm drain." Fiona's eyes lifted to Keith's, a smile playing at her lips. "A regular hero then." Keith felt his face flush. "We're actually running late. I have to get Lily to school and then get to work." "Where do you work?" Fiona asked, straightening up. "Hardy's Hardware in the mornings, and then I bartend at the Rusty Nail 4 nights a week," Keith said, grabbing his keys. He didn't mention that he was picking up a third job starting next week, delivering pizzas on the nights he wasn't bartending. "Let me give you a ride," Fiona offered. "It's the least I can do." Before Keith could protest, Lily was already bouncing with excitement. "Do you have a fancy car?" "Dad and I only have bikes." "Lily," Keith admonished gently, but Fiona laughed. "I do have a car waiting downstairs, and yes, some might consider it fancy." The car turned out to be a sleek black luxury SUV with a driver in a suit. Keith hesitated at the curb while Lily immediately climbed in, awed by the leather seats and the small TV screens built into the headrests. "I can't accept this," Keith said quietly to Fiona. "It's too much." Fiona stepped closer to him, and he caught the faint scent of an expensive perfume that made his heart skip. "Keith, you pulled me from the ocean and breathed life back into my body. A car ride is nothing." Put that way, it was hard to argue. Keith slid into the backseat beside Lily, feeling completely out of place as the driver smoothly pulled away from the curb. "Where to first?" Fiona asked, sitting across from them. After dropping Lily at school, where she proudly introduced Fiona to her friends as the lady Dad rescued, they headed to the hardware store. During the short drive, Fiona asked questions about Keith's life. He found himself telling her things he rarely shared about how he'd been working toward a business degree when his wife got sick, about the medical bills that had forced him to drop out and take whatever jobs he could find, about his dream of someday opening his own construction company. "You've been through a lot," Fiona said softly when he finished. "I admire how you've handled it all, especially for Lily's sake." "She's everything to me," Keith said simply. The car stopped in front of Hardy's Hardware. "Thank you for the ride," Keith said, reaching for the door handle. "Wait," Fiona said. "I'd like to see you again, maybe dinner, to thank you properly." Keith hesitated. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because," he said with a small smile, "women like you don't have dinner with men like me unless they're feeling obligated or charitable. And I'm not looking for either." Fiona's expression softened. "What if I just want to have dinner with a man who risked his life to save mine? A man who clearly loves his daughter more than anything and works harder than anyone I know." Keith felt something stir inside him, a feeling he'd thought was long buried with his wife. "I work tonight at the bar, but tomorrow night I'm free." "Tomorrow then," Fiona said with a smile that made his pulse quicken. "I'll pick you up at 7. All day at the hardware store, Keith found himself distracted. Fiona Gardiner. The name had seemed vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it until Mrs. Peterson, a regular customer who loved to gossip, came in for light bulbs and happened to mention the big scandal at Gardiner Technologies. "Did you see the news?" she asked as Keith rang up her purchase. "Fiona Gardiner's ex-CFO is going to prison for embezzlement. Good for her for fighting back." That company was her father's legacy. Keith froze. Gardiner Technologies. The tech giant, Mrs. Peterson nodded, worth billions. And she runs it all herself now since her father passed. Shame about her brother, though, died in that boating accident 5 years ago. Left her all alone with that empire. Keith's mind reeled as he handed Mrs. Peterson her change. Fiona wasn't just well off, she was one of the richest women in the country. What was she doing having dinner with him? That night at the bar, Keith found it hard to concentrate on mixing drinks. His co-worker Jake nudged him as he fumbled a martini order. Earth to Keith. "What's going on with you tonight?" Keith shook his head. "Nothing, just tired. Dad's stuff wearing you out again. How's Lily?" "She's great. Staying with Mrs. Delgado next door tonight." Keith appreciated Jake's concern. They'd started at the Rusty Nail together 2 years ago, and Jake had become one of his few friends, often covering shifts when Lily was sick or had school events. "You know," Jake said, leaning in conspiratorially, "rumor has it Fiona Gardiner is in town." The Fiona Gardiner. Apparently she nearly drowned at Rockaway a few days ago. Keith nearly dropped the glass he was wiping. "Where'd you hear that?" "My cousin works at the hospital. Said some guy gave her CPR on the beach, saved her life." Jake shrugged. "Imagine saving a billionaire." "That guy's probably set for life now." Keith said nothing, focusing on wiping down the bar. He wasn't looking for a reward. And he certainly didn't want Fiona to feel indebted to him. The next evening, after spending an hour trying to decide what to wear from his limited wardrobe, Keith settled on his only pair of decent jeans and a blue button-down shirt that Lily insisted matched his eyes. He'd just finished getting ready when there was a knock at the door. Lily, who was staying with Mrs. Delgado again, had made him promise to take pictures and tell her everything about the fancy date with the rich lady. Keith opened the door to find Fiona standing there in a simple black dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup that highlighted her natural beauty. "You look amazing," he said before he could stop himself. She smiled. "So do you. Ready?" He'd expected another chauffeured SUV, but instead, Fiona led him to a classic convertible parked at the curb. "I thought I'd drive tonight," she said, tossing him the keys. "But maybe you'd like to." Keith caught the keys, surprised. "This is yours." "My father taught me to appreciate vintage cars. This one's a 1965 Mustang, original engine." Keith ran his hand over the pristine paint job. "It's beautiful." "I thought we'd go somewhere a little out of the way," Fiona said as they drove along the coast. "I'm not really in the mood for anywhere too visible." Keith understood. Someone of her status probably couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. The restaurant turned out to be a small Italian place perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was cozy and elegant without being pretentious. The owner greeted Fiona by name and led them to a private table on the terrace where they could hear the waves crashing below. "I found this place by accident a few years ago," Fiona explained. "It's one of the few restaurants where I can just be a regular person." As they settled in with glasses of wine, Keith finally addressed what had been on his mind. "So, Gardiner Technologies, that's you." Fiona nodded, taking a sip of her wine. "That's me. Does it make you uncomfortable?" Keith considered the question. "Not uncomfortable, just confused." "Why are you here with me?" "Because when I was drowning, money meant nothing. Power meant nothing. In that moment, I was just a woman fighting to live, and you were just a man brave enough to help." She leaned forward. "Do you know how rare it is for me to meet someone who sees me as just Fiona? Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, not as someone who can do something for them. I didn't even know who you were when I pulled you out," Keith admitted. "Exactly." Her eyes held his. "And even now that you do know, you're still just talking to me like I'm a normal person." "You are a normal person, just with an abnormal bank account." Fiona laughed, a genuine sound that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "I like you, Keith Mitchell. You're real." Over dinner, they talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their struggles. Keith told her about meeting his late wife in college, about Lily's birth, about the devastating diagnosis 3 years ago that had turned their world upside down. "I promised Sarah I'd give Lily the best life possible," he said. "Some days I wonder if I'm doing enough." "From what I've seen, you're giving her the most important things: love, stability, and example of integrity," Fiona said. "Those matter more than material things," says the billionaire, Keith teased gently. Fiona's expression grew serious. "I grew up with everything money could buy, but my parents were always working. My father built his empire but barely knew his children. My mother was more interested in social standing than bedtime stories." She twirled her wine glass. "I'd trade some of those trust funds for more family dinners any day." After dinner, they walked along a nearby beach, shoes in hand. The night was warm, the sky clear and filled with stars. Keith couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so at ease with someone. "Tell me about your business idea," Fiona said as they walked. "The construction company." Keith was surprised she remembered. "It's nothing grand. I've always been good with my hands and I worked construction through college. I'd like to start a company focused on affordable renovations for working families, people who can't afford to hire the big firms but deserve quality work." "That's not nothing," Fiona said. "That's exactly the kind of business that changes communities." They stopped walking and Keith turned to face her. The moonlight cast a silver glow on her face, and without thinking, he reached up to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. She leaned into his touch ever so slightly. "Fiona, I need to be honest. I can't offer you anything close to what you're used to." "I'm not asking you to," she said softly. "I have a daughter who needs stability. I have 3 jobs that barely keep us afloat. My life is—" He gestured vaguely, "complicated." "Life is always complicated," Fiona replied. "Mine included. But right now, standing here with you, it feels remarkably simple." The drive back to his apartment was quiet, both lost in thought. When they arrived, Keith walked her to her car, now parked at the curb. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "It was unexpected." Fiona looked up at him, her expression unreadable in the dim streetlight. "Would you like to do it again?" Keith knew he should say no. Their worlds were too different, but something about Fiona Gardiner made him want to leap without looking. "Yes," he said, "I would." She smiled and reached up on tiptoe to press a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Keith Mitchell." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind. Fiona and Keith saw each other nearly every day. She joined them for a picnic in the park, laughing as Lily taught her how to fly a kite. He accompanied her to a small gallery opening, feeling out of place among the art world elite, but warmed by the way Fiona kept her hand firmly in his. They cooked dinner together in his tiny kitchen, Fiona proving surprisingly adept with a spatula, despite her admission that she rarely cooked at home. "My chef would be horrified," she joked as she flipped pancakes one Sunday morning, Lily supervising critically. "You have your own chef?" Lily asked, wide-eyed. "I do, but he doesn't make pancakes as good as these," Fiona winked. Keith watched the easy interaction between them, a mixture of joy and anxiety churning in his stomach. He was falling for Fiona hard and fast, and Lily was clearly smitten with her too. But he couldn't shake the fear that this was all temporary, that Fiona would eventually return to her world of board meetings and galas, leaving them with memories and a void that would be impossible to fill. His fears seemed to materialize one evening when Fiona showed up at his apartment unannounced, her expression tense. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "I have to go to Tokyo. There's an issue with our Asian division that I need to handle personally." She hesitated. "I'll be gone for at least 2 weeks. "Oh," Keith felt a weight settle in his chest. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Fiona said. "I came to say goodbye." Lily, who had been watching TV, came over and wrapped her arms around Fiona's waist. "Will you bring me something from Japan?" Fiona hugged her back, meeting Keith's eyes over Lily's head. "Of course I will, sweetie." After Lily went to bed, they sat on Keith's worn sofa, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. "Keith," Fiona finally said, "I need to know what you're thinking." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm thinking that these past 2 weeks have been amazing. I'm thinking that I haven't felt this way about anyone since Sarah. And I'm thinking that you're about to fly halfway around the world in your private jet back to your real life." "This is my real life too," Fiona said, taking his hand. The time I spend with you and Lily, it's the most real I've felt in years. But it can't last, can it? We're from different worlds, Fiona. She looked at him, her blue eyes intense. Why not? Why can't it last? Because eventually, you'll realize that dating a struggling single dad with more debt than savings doesn't fit into your lifestyle. Because I can't give you the kind of life you're used to. Have I ever asked you to? Fiona's voice was gentle but firm. Keith, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What I don't have is someone who sees me really sees me. Until you. She leaned forward and kissed him, a kiss that spoke of possibility and promise. Keith pulled her closer, allowing himself to hope, just for a moment, that maybe this impossible thing between them could work. When Fiona left for Tokyo the next morning, she left Keith with a key to her beach house, in case you and Lily want a change of scenery and a promise to call every day. The first week of her absence was harder than Keith had expected. He found himself constantly checking his phone for messages, and Lily asked about Fiona constantly. When is she coming back? Can we go visit her in Tokyo? Do you think she knows how to speak Japanese? The daily video calls helped, but they also underscored the vastness of the gulf between their worlds. Fiona would call from luxury hotel suites or sleek corporate offices, while Keith answered from his cluttered apartment or the back room of the hardware store. Then, 10 days into Fiona's trip, disaster struck. Keith arrived at work to find Hardy's Hardware closed, a sign on the door announcing that the owner had sold the business to a national chain that would be restructuring operations. In other words, he was out of a job. That same afternoon, his landlord informed him that the building had been sold and all tenants would need to vacate within 60 days. The new owners were converting the apartments into luxury condominiums. Keith sat at his kitchen table that night after Lily was in bed, bills spread out before him, trying to figure out how they would manage. Even with his bartending job and the new pizza delivery gig, they would struggle to find a new apartment with the rising rental prices in the area. When Fiona called, he tried to sound upbeat, but she saw right through him. "What's wrong?" she asked, her face concerned even through the small screen. Keith sighed and told her about the job and the apartment. "It's just a rough patch," he assured her. "We've been through worse." "I'll figure something out." Fiona was quiet for a moment. "Let me help, Keith." "No," he said firmly. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't take your money." "It's not charity, it would feel like it to me," Keith interrupted. "Please understand, I need to handle this my way." Fiona looked like she wanted to argue, but instead nodded. "I respect that. Just know the offer stands if you change your mind." The call ended with declarations of missing each other and promises that she'd be home soon. Keith went to bed feeling both warmed by her concern and more convinced than ever that their relationship existed in a bubble that would eventually burst when reality fully intruded. 3 days later, Keith was at the Rusty Nail, his mind elsewhere as he automatically mixed drinks and made small talk with regulars. Jake nudged him as he wiped down glasses. "Hey, there's some guy in a suit asking for you. Looks important." Keith frowned and turned to see a distinguished older man in an expensive suit sitting at the end of the bar. He approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man extended his hand. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Howard Reeves, Miss Gardiner's attorney. Could we speak privately for a moment?" A cold feeling settled in Keith's stomach as he led Howard to an empty table in the corner. Had Fiona sent her lawyer to break things off? Was this the "it's not you, it's me" conversation by proxy? "Miss Gardiner asked me to give you this," Howard said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Keith didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Business documents. Miss Gardiner has purchased the Hardy's Hardware building and would like to offer you the opportunity to manage the store. She's also acquired a small construction company that needs a new director." The details are all in there, along with a very generous compensation package. Keith stared at the envelope, a mixture of emotions churning inside him. Anger rose to the top. "I told her I didn't want her help." Howard's expression remained neutral. Miss Gardiner anticipated this reaction. "She asked me to tell you that this isn't charity, it's an investment. She believes in your skills and vision. The positions are legitimate, and you would be expected to work hard and produce results." Keith pushed the envelope back. "Please thank Miss Gardiner, but tell her I have to decline." Howard didn't pick up the envelope. She also asked me to give you this. He handed Keith a folded note with his name written in Fiona's elegant handwriting. Against his better judgment, Keith opened it. Keith, before you say no, please understand that this isn't about money, it's about partnership. I believe in you. This isn't me rescuing you, it's me investing in someone I care about deeply. Your pride is one of the things I admire about you, but don't let it stand in the way of an opportunity that could change Lily's life. Think about it. All my love, Fiona. Keith read the note twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. Tell Miss Gardiner I'll consider it. Howard nodded and left, leaving the envelope on the table. Keith stared at it for a long time before finally picking it up and tucking it under the bar. That night, after his shift ended, Keith sat on his couch and read through every document in the envelope. The offer was more than generous, it was life-changing. The salary alone would allow him to provide Lily with the kind of security he'd only dreamed of, and the position at the construction company aligned perfectly with his long-term goals. But the question remained, could he accept help from Fiona without feeling like he was compromising his independence? Without feeling like he was becoming another charity project for a billionaire with more money than she knew what to do with? The answer came to him as he watched Lily sleep, her face peaceful in the dim glow of her night light. This wasn't just about him. It was about giving his daughter opportunities he'd never had. And maybe, just maybe, it was about allowing himself to be vulnerable enough to accept help from someone who truly cared about him. The next morning, he called Howard and accepted the position. Fiona returned from Tokyo 2 days later. Keith and Lily met her at the airport, Lily holding a hand-drawn sign that said, "Welcome home, Fiona." The moment Fiona spotted them, her tired face lit up with a smile that made Keith's heart race. She knelt to hug Lily first, then stood and wrapped her arms around Keith, holding him tightly. "I missed you," she whispered against his neck. "I missed you too," he said, breathing in the scent of her perfume. "And I accepted the job." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his. "You did," Keith nodded, "on one condition. Name it. I need to know that this us isn't tied to the job, that if things don't work out between us, I'm not going to lose my livelihood along with my heart." Fiona's expression softened. "Keith, I would never use that against you. Everything is in writing and the position is yours regardless of our personal relationship." She hesitated, then added, "But I hope that won't be an issue." "Why's that?" he asked. "Because I'm in love with you," she said simply, "and I don't plan on going anywhere." Keith felt a smile spread across his face. "Good, because I'm in love with you too, and Lily would never forgive me if I let you get away." "What about Lily?" Lily asked, tugging on Keith's hand. "I'm right here, you know." Keith laughed and knelt down to her level. "Lily, how would you feel if Fiona became a bigger part of our lives?" "Like a permanent part," Lily looked between them, her young face serious. "Like she would live with us and stuff. Maybe someday," Keith said. "If that's what we all wanted." Lily considered this, then nodded decisively. "I think that would be okay. As long as she knows that Sunday is pancake day and you can't wear shoes on the couch." Fiona knelt down next to Keith. "Those sound like excellent rules. Any others I should know about?" "Dad gives the best goodnight hugs, but I guess you could have the second best ones." Fiona's eyes shimmered with tears as she smiled. "I would be honored to have the second best hugs." 1 year later, Keith stood on the beach at sunset, watching as Lily ran along the shore, collecting shells and calling out excitedly each time she found a particularly special one. Behind him, the lights of their new beach house, a wedding gift from Fiona, twinkled warmly in the growing darkness. So much had changed in a year. The hardware store was thriving under his management, and the construction company had already completed 3 major projects focused on affordable housing renovations. Keith had insisted on earning his way, working harder than anyone to prove that Fiona's faith in him wasn't misplaced. And Fiona. She had integrated herself into their lives with grace and patience, never trying to replace Sarah in Lily's heart, but creating her own special bond with his daughter. She had scaled back her international travel and delegated more responsibility to her executive team, prioritizing family dinners and Lily's school events. "Penny for your thoughts," Fiona said, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. Her wedding ring caught the last rays of sunlight, sending prisms dancing across the sand. Keith turned in her arms. "Just thinking about how everything changed that day you were drowning." "You mean the day you saved my life," she said with a smile. "I think we saved each other," Keith replied, pulling her close. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that someone like you would choose someone like me." Fiona shook her head. "There's no someone like you or someone like me. There's just us, Keith and Fiona. A man who loves his daughter more than anything in the world and works harder than anyone I know, and a woman who finally found what she was looking for when she wasn't even searching." "And what was that?" Keith asked, though he already knew the answer. "A family," Fiona said, looking out at Lily, who was now waving excitedly, calling for them to come see her latest discovery. A real family. Keith took her hand, and together they walked toward Lily, toward their future, a future neither could have imagined, that fateful day when a struggling single dad performed CPR on a billionaire who was much more than her bank account. A future built not on wealth or status, but on something far more valuable: love, respect, and the courage to dive in when it mattered most.